Hello everyone, thank you for joining us for today's Tech Forum session. I'm Ainsley Sparks, the Marketing and Communications Manager at BookNet Canada. Welcome to this month's webinar, a look back at 2021 in our rearview mirror. Before we get started, we wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of the lands that we are on. Today I'm broadcasting from the traditional territories of the original nations of this land, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat Indigenous peoples. I encourage you to visit the native-land.ca website to learn more about the peoples whose land you are joining from today. BookNet Canada endorses the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada and supports an ongoing shift from gatekeeping to space-making in the book industry. In the spirit of that acknowledgement, I confirm our responsibility in mending the sacred hoop with Canada's Indigenous peoples, to be an ally to all Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and to unite and work alongside one another. So I think a lot of us had high hopes for a return to quote-unquote normal in 2021, and in some ways it was more familiar than 2020, but for the most part it was still a pandemic year. Clearly that means a lot of different things to all of us, but in this presentation we're going to look at what that means for books. It's actually a relatively rosy picture. For more details, let's talk to BookNet Canada's resident sales data expert and project manager, Monique Monjon. I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about what happened to print book sales in Canada this year so far.
Yeah, it's been a good year for print books in Canada this year, with stores open across most of the country for most of the year. Sales patterns are a little more typical than we saw in 2020 when sales were going up and down as different restrictions changed in terms of what was allowed to be open or closed. So we have noticed that the sales are a little more pre-pandemic-like this year. In 2020, we saw the biggest dip in sales from March through May. So Q2 essentially had much lower sales in 2020 than in previous years. But if we look at 2021 sales for the same Q2 period, we're about on par with the average sales for the last 5 years before the pandemic began. So looks to be a solid pre-pandemic sales year for books.
I mean, that's great news. I'm sure lots of people are happy to see that and hear that. So the biggest sales of the year often come towards the end of the year with the holiday shopping and the December sales boost. How is that looking this year?
Yeah, we are in the thick of holiday shopping season right now. So it's hard to say how it will pan out in totality. But last year we noticed the holiday shopping bump started about 2 weeks earlier than it did in 2019. 2020's holiday shopping really seemed to kick off around the second week of November. I had mentioned last year that perhaps others like myself had started shopping earlier to allow time to ship or mail gifts to their recipients, since restrictions at that time really were limiting gatherings. Looking at 2021 so far, the holiday shopping bump seems to have kicked off even earlier. It looks like holiday shopping began in the first week of November. There could be a lot of reasons for this. Many industries are experiencing supply chain problems and encouraging customers to shop earlier this year. That may have had an impact on the earlier sales. Another thing to note is that Hanukkah was earlier this year than last year. This year, Hanukkah ran from November 28th to December 6th. Last year, it was a little later, December 10th to 18th. So that may have influenced some of those buying patterns as well.
Yeah, you were mentioning shopping last year online and trying to get everything ordered. And I mean, we've had like another whole year of this online shopping and getting used to it. So maybe people started doing that earlier this year. So if we look at 2021 compared with 2020 and pre-pandemic 2019, what does that picture look like?
Yeah, so sales in 2021 are up about 7% over 2020, and we're up 5% over 2019's numbers. So that's pretty good, up over both years. We still have lots of big sales to come through the end of December. We're recording this on December 9th. So There's still lots of holiday shopping left to do in December. Traditionally, the last few weeks of December are the best-selling weeks of the year. So we'll have to see how that impacts the overall numbers for the year, but things are looking good so far.
That's great. Are you seeing any differences in terms of what people are buying this year over what they bought last year? Any different subjects popping up?
Yes, there are a lot of really interesting things happening with different subjects this year. We talked last year, we've covered it on our blog a few times, that juvenile nonfiction had a really good year in 2020. Sales were up about 8% over 2019. But that trend hasn't held through 2021. Juvenile nonfiction sales are down about 6% over last year. So lots of juvenile nonfiction buying last year, less of that this year. What's interesting is that young adult nonfiction, so a slightly older age range, but still nonfiction, is up this year 21%. It's a pretty small category overall, but it's growing a lot. There's a lot of best-selling adult nonfiction getting adapted for younger audiences in the YA nonfiction category. So this subject might be one to watch with that level of growth over this year. What other subjects? Manga has had a really good year. We've covered it on our blog a few times. Manga sales are up 104% over last year, which is pretty significant. So that's something to keep an eye on as we move into 2022. Romance LGBTQ, that subcategory is up 241% over last year. Again, really incredible growth, very significant interest from readers in that category compared to last year. So that's another category to watch in 2022. Something else we've covered a lot is the backlist sales growth. Backlist sales have been up about 2.5% each year for the last 2 years. Looking at year to date, it looks like we might see a similar pattern this year. So we did some analysis on those backlist titles and those sales, looking at different pub date ranges, and found that books between 2 and 5 years old tend to perform the best in sales. And of that group, 2-year-old titles do the most sales in that group. So it might be a good time to dust off your 2-year-old backlist and give it another shot to keep selling. And related to that backlist data, what's interesting is that in that 2 to 5 year age band, we're also seeing a lot of books that have been popular on BookTok, the sort of book influencer TikTok. They fall in that same pub date range, that 2 to 5 year period. So a number of older titles have been able to find new audiences on BookTok. So TikTok's influence on sales trends in books and trending titles is something to keep an eye on. We've covered that on the blog a few times, and I'm sure we'll be looking at it again in the new year as new titles pop off on the For You page.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that pans out, what effect that has. And also, people are starting to talk about what that might mean for book deals and new authors. Are they going to find TikTok stars and make them bestsellers? Find out in 2022 and beyond, I guess.
I'll be watching the data every week to find out.
So that's the print book picture so far in 2021. But what about the habits and behaviors of Canadians? To shed some light on that, we'll turn to our consumer data that we get from the Canadian Book Consumer Survey. It's a quarterly survey conducted by BookNet Canada, querying Canadians about their book behavior. The online survey was fielded primarily in April, June, and September 2021 to just under 5,000 English-speaking Canadians who met our screening criteria. So first, let's talk about the return to in-person bookstores. At the beginning of this year, of all bookstore visits, 65% were happening online and only 35% were in person. This makes sense as there were closures across the country and many people were staying home. But the gap has been narrowing, and by the time we get to the third quarter of this year, we see that 55% of bookstore visits happened online and 45% were in store. It's pretty even. What about purchases? We're seeing something similar. Online and in-person purchases are almost back to 2019 levels. In our September survey, 57% of purchases were made online and 43% in person. Other COVID data we've gathered in our consumer studies for the first 3 quarters of the year. We asked Canadians whether COVID was impacting their book buying. 19% said yes, 15% 15% said sometimes, but the majority, 66%, said that it had not. The answers are similar for whether COVID was impacting their book borrowing. 25% said yes, 14% said sometimes, 14% said sometimes, and 62% said no. When we look at their reading behavior, we see that Canadians are readers. 77% of Canadians read a print book at least once in the last 12 months, and just over half read a print book at least once a month. 42% read an ebook at least once, 28% listened to a digital audiobook, and 21% listened to a physical audiobook. As you can probably tell by now, we're data people here at BookNet, so we thought it'd be interesting to gather some stats on the reading habits of the BookNet staff. In 2021, to date, we've collectively read a total of 368 books. The format breakdown: 44% were print books, 36% were ebooks, and 20% were audiobooks. BookNet staff preferred fiction to nonfiction. 63% of the books we read were fiction, and 47% were nonfiction. 21% were by Canadian contributors. We're big library users at BookNet. 75% of the books we read were borrowed from a public library, but we bought lots of books too, 170 or so in 2021. We also have to shout out our most prolific BookNet reader, who at the time of our surveying in early December had read 106 books and had 5 more on the go. Interestingly, we found that one BookNetter only read fiction, one only read nonfiction, one only read print, and one only read ebooks. Each year, the BookNet staff recommends some of our favorite books that we discovered that year, and this year is no different. You can find our staff picks blog post to see them all, but here's a sampling. Monique Monjon, who you heard from earlier, recommended some Instagram poetry. I Hope This Finds You Well by Kate Bear, where the author created erasure poems from the harassing, unfriendly direct messages in her inbox. Jackie Fry, Director of Product Development, calls Jordan Abel's Nishka profound, moving, and a must-read. Carol Gordon, Project Manager, aptly recommends a book about knitting with a beautiful knitting metaphor. In Unraveling Canada, Sylvia Olsen touches on questions of appropriation and respect, and as she travels across the country, on the things that knit us together as Canadians. Research Coordinator Shim Hirschberg-Pleskin says Work Clean by Dan Sharnes is literally the only book she's finished and then started rereading from the beginning. High praise indeed. Hannah Johnson, Product Coordinator, recommends Res Rules by Chief Clarence Louie. Not a memoir, but a blueprint for the future of First Nations communities and a direct and passionate treatise on leadership. Noah Genner, President and CEO of BookNet, is looking forward to Toronto Quarterly's Leonard Cohen on a Wire. The illustrations by Philippe Girard look beautiful, waiting with anticipation. There's so many more in the blog post. Take a look if you're looking for your next great read. Speaking of popular books, let's segue into the best-selling books of 2021. Using sales data, our sales tracking service for the Canadian English language trade book market, we pulled some reports to find the top-selling print books in Canada year to date. Here are the best-selling fiction titles ranked in order of units sold. The Rose Code by Kate Quinn, The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, The Last Thing He Told Me by Laura Dave, State of Terror by Hillary Rodham Clinton and Louise Penny, Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens, The Push by Ashley Audrain, It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover, Five Little Indians by Michelle Good, The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, and The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Only half of these 10 titles were published in 2021. The Rose Code, The Last Thing He Told Me, State of Terror, Where the Crawdads Sing, and The Push. And only one was also on last year's end of the year bestseller list, Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. We have 2 thriller Bizacs and 2 are women's fiction. The first three titles in the Canadian top 10 lists were also on the overall fiction list. State of Terror by Hillary Rodham Clinton and Louise Penny, The Push by Ashley Audrain, Five Little Indians by Michelle Good, Then came The Madness of Crowds by Louise Penny, The Apollo Murders by Chris Hadfield, Not a Happy Family by Sherry Lapina, Fight Night by Miriam Taves, The Marrow Thieves by Sherry Dimeline, The Strangers by Katharina Vermette, Our Darkest Night by Jennifer Robson. 2 Louise Penny titles, 1 astronaut-penned action-adventure thriller, and 80% were published in 2021. None were on the top 10 list in 2020, though Louise Penny and Sherry Lapina both had different titles in last year's top 10. On to the overall nonfiction list. Atomic Habits by James Clear, Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, The Guinness Book of World Records 2022, The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse by Charles Mackesy, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, Beyond Order by Jordan B. Peterson, Untamed by Glennon Doyle, Keep Sharp by Sanjay Gupta, A Promised Land by Barack Obama, Indian in the Cabinet by Jody Wilson-Raybould. Surprisingly, only 40% of these were published this year, and only 2, Untamed and A Promised Land, were on last year's lists. 3 psychology titles and 3 biography and autobiography titles were on this list. It's what Canadians want to buy in 2021. Now on to the best-selling Canadian nonfiction. Beyond Order by Jordan B. Peterson, Indian in the Cabinet by Jody Wilson-Raybould, The Bomber Mafia by Malcolm Gladwell, Homebody by Rupi Kaur, Crossroads by Caleb Dahlgren, 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act by Bob Joseph, Talking to Canadians by Rick Mercer, Mandy's Gourmet Salads by Mandy Wolf, Rebecca Wolf, and Meredith Erickson, From the Ashes by Jesse Thistle, No One Wins Alone by Mark Messier. The first 2 titles here were on the overall list as well. 4 of these titles are in the biography and autobiography BISAC category, so Canadians also want to read about Canadians this year. Just 1 appeared on last year's lists, Jesse Thistle's From the Ashes. The best-selling juvenile YA top 10, Dogman, Mothering Heights by Dave Pilkey, They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera, Rowley Jefferson's Awesome, Friendly, Spooky Stories by Jeff Kinney, Big Shot by Jeff Kinney, Cat Kid Comic Club by Dave Pilkey, Claudia and the New Girl by Anne M. Martin and Gabriella Epstein, I Love You to the Moon and Back by Amelia Hepworth and Tim Warnes, We Were Liars by E. Lockhart, Shadow and Bone by Lee Bardugo, and The Very Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Carle. 3 of these titles are young adult fiction. The rest are juvenile. This list has the title with the oldest pub date of all the top 10 lists. This edition of The Very Hungry Caterpillar was published in 1994. It is for sure older than some of you listening right now. There's no overlap on this year's top 10 list when compared with last year's, but Dave Pilkey had 3 different titles making the top 10 lists last year, and Jeff Kinney had 2. None of the titles in the overall list are by Canadian contributors, so here's a Canadian juvenile YA list with no overlap from the preceding list. Love You Forever by Robert Munsch and Sheila McGraw. Also Love You Forever by Sheila McGraw and Robert Munsch. There are 2 different editions of Love You Forever on this list. One is a paperback and one is a board book. They have separate ISBNs, so we count them twice. The Paper-Bag Princess by Robert Munsch and Michael Marchenko. Be You by Peter H. Reynolds, Pax by Sarah Pennypacker and John Klassen, My Heart Fills with Happiness by Monique Gray Smith and Julie Flett, Sweet as Kulu by Selena Kuluk and Alexandria Neonakis, School Rules by Robert Munsch and Dave Waymond, Mortimer by Robert Munsch and Michael Marchenko, Smelly Socks by Robert Munsch and Michael Marchenko. Robert Munsch is clearly beloved. His books make up 60% of this list, and that's not just an anomaly for 2021. His books are perennial bestsellers. No young adult titles made the top 10. They're all juvenile books. In terms of books that had staying power from last year's list to this year's, 4 books, all Robert Munsch titles, appeared on last year's list. Love You Forever, The Paper-Bag Princess, School Rules, and Smelly Socks. Let's move on to libraries in Canada. Using library data, the National Library Collection and Circulation and Analysis tool, we can find the top circulated books in 2021 so far. The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna, The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, The Push by Ashley Audrain, Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens, The Law of Innocence by Michael Connolly, A Time for Mercy by John Grisham, All the Devils Are Here by Louise Penny, Anxious People by Frederick Bachman, and The Guest List by Lucy Foley. It's interesting to see the differences between the circulated titles and the print books that are selling in the Canadian market. Only 3 of these titles, The Midnight Library, The Push, and Where the Crawdads Sing, made the top 10 best-selling lists. Now onto Canadian fiction. The Push by Ashley Audrain, All the Devils Are Here by Louise Penny, The Pull of the Stars by Emma Donoghue, The Madness of Crowds by Louise Penny, How to Pronounce Knife by Suvankam Themuvongosa, 5 Little Indians by Michelle Good, The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel, Indians on Vacation by Thomas King, A Town Called Solace by Mary Lawson, and Our Darkest Night by Jennifer Robson. 4 of the most circulated Canadian fiction titles were also in the top 10 best-selling list: The Push, The Madness of Crowds, 5 Little Indians, and Our Darkest Night. On the nonfiction list, we find A Promised Land by Barack Obama, Untamed by Glennon Doyle, From the Ashes by Jessie Thistle, The Guinness Book of World Records 2022, Cased by Isabel Wilkerson, Educated by Tara Westover, Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey, Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell, If I Knew Then by Jan Arden, and Atomic Habits by James Clear. Just 4 of these are in the top 10 best-selling: Promised Land, Untamed, Guinness World Records, and Atomic Habits. On the Canadian nonfiction list, we have From the Ashes by Jessie Thistle, The Guinness Book of World Records 2022, Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell, If I Knew Then by Jan Arden, The Bomber Mafia by Malcolm Gladwell, Two Trees Make a Forest by Jessica J. Lee, Oh, She Glows for Dinner by Angela Liddon, No Time Like the Future by Michael J. Fox, 12 Rules for Life by Jordan B. Peterson, and Values by Mark Carney. 4 of these titles were on the overall nonfiction most circulated lists, but only 2, From the Ashes and The Bomber Mafia, were on the top 10 best-selling list. So moving on to the juvenile list, and here's where things get a little less straightforward. Library data uses ISBN clusters to track circulations, holds, etc. in the system. This differs from sales data, which reports data at a per ISBN level. We do this because of how libraries report their collection data to us. Their data is broken out by their catalog ID or record often. Each record can contain multiple ISBNs. The Raina Telgemeier collection, Plants vs. Zombies series, Amulet series by Kazu Kibuishi, The Wings of Fire series by Tui T. Sutherland, and the Dork Diaries series by Rachel Renee Russell. We see some of the same names in this list as in the top-selling juvenile and YA titles. The Canadian and juvenile YA list is similar in that it pulls in clusters of titles in a series or set, but there are fewer of them in this list. So first we have a Robert Munsch collection, a Guinness Book of World Records collection, John Le Bon series by Alex A., Whatever After series by Sarah Mlynowski, Anna Green Gables series by L.M. Montgomery, Duck Duck Dinosaur series by Callie George and Oriole Vidal, The Nameless City series by Faith Aaron Hicks, The Enormous Suitcase by Robert Munsch and Michael Marchenko, Teamwork by Robert Munsch and Michael Marchenko, and Inkling by Kenneth Opel and Sydney Smith. So those were the books that were popular in 2021. Thanks for joining us today. We wish you all the best for a great 2022 book year. And if you enjoyed this presentation, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We post webinars throughout the year on topics of interest to all corners of the book industry. Before we go, we'd like to thank the Department of Canadian Heritage for their support through the Canada Book Fund. And thanks again to Monique Mangin for sharing sales data stats with us, and to all of you for watching.